There's something particularly peaceful about Tuesday mornings, isn't there? I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee, and the light streaming through the kitchen window has that perfect quality that only happens in early June. It's warm but not yet hot, golden but not overwhelming. And there's this gentle breeze carrying the scent of Mrs. Chen's roses from next door. Benny has just finished his Tuesday morning security patrol, which I've noticed is slightly less intensive than his Monday routine. You know how some people ease into their week gradually? Well, apparently my dog has developed his own version of that. Yesterday, he checked every single corner of the yard with the thoroughness of someone conducting a formal inspection. Today, he seemed more relaxed about the whole enterprise. Still professional, mind you, but with a certain Tuesday morning casualness that I find rather endearing. I can hear him now, settling into his favorite spot by the kitchen window, that contented sigh dogs make when they've completed their important work and found the perfect patch of morning sunlight. There's something so reassuring about these weekly rhythms, the way our routines shift just slightly from day to day while maintaining their essential comfort. It got me thinking about the patterns I've been noticing in my friends' lives lately, how everyone seems to have their own weekly cycles, their own ways of building momentum through the week. Take Sarah, for instance. I got the most wonderful message from her yesterday evening, and I keep finding myself smiling when I think about it. You know how I mentioned Sarah's miraculous transformation from plant killer to herb garden success story? Well, her little balcony garden is apparently thriving beyond anything she dared hope for. She sent me this photo yesterday that just filled me with such pride and happiness for her. Those cherry tomato plants she added a few weeks ago are showing their first tiny green fruits. Tiny little things, no bigger than marbles. But Sarah was so excited about them, you'd think she'd discovered gold. But here's what really struck me about her message. She mentioned that her neighbor Tommy, the college student who originally helped her with herb advice, now comes to her for gardening tips. Can you imagine? Sarah, who once famously killed a cactus in college, is now the person other people turn to for plant wisdom. She's become the building's unofficial herb expert, and apparently several of her neighbors have started their own container gardens inspired by her success. I think Kevin's influence has been really wonderful for her confidence, not just with the garden, though that's certainly part of it. Sarah mentioned that he's been teaching her about companion planting, how certain plants support each other when they're grown together. She said it reminded her of friendships, the way good relationships help each person grow better than they would alone. That's so very Sarah, isn't it? Finding the deeper meaning in practical things, seeing connections between gardening and life. She's been experimenting with different herbs now, thanks to Kevin bringing her what he calls interesting challenges from the farmer's market. Apparently last weekend, he showed up with some unusual pepper seedlings and convinced her she was ready to try growing something a bit more adventurous. The fact that she said yes to that experiment tells me so much about how her confidence has grown. The old Sarah would have been terrified of killing someone else's plants. This Sarah is ready to learn something new. You know what I love most about this whole garden success story? It's not just about the plants. Sarah's discovering she has instincts and abilities she never knew existed. She told me she started to understand when her herbs need water just by looking at them, how the leaves change color subtly when they're getting thirsty. That kind of intuitive knowledge takes time to develop, and it requires really paying attention to living things in a way that Sarah never had to before. And speaking of teaching and learning new skills, I was thinking about Elena and her community center baking classes. Today is Tuesday, which means tonight she'll be at the community center with her students, and I find myself wondering how everyone's progressing. Elena has this wonderful gift for helping people discover they're capable of more than they believed possible. Actually, you know what? I should probably back up and tell you about Elena's latest Gerald the Sourdough Starter adventure, because it perfectly captures both her generous spirit and her slightly chaotic approach to life. Apparently, last week during her class, she brought along what she started calling Gerald's offspring. She's been propagating starter from her original Gerald and giving portions to any students who want to try bread making at home. Now, Elena being Elena, she didn't just hand out jars of starter and send people on their way. Oh no, she created little care packages for each person, complete with handwritten feeding schedules, troubleshooting guides, and her phone number in case of sourdough emergencies. She even made tiny labels for each jar with names like Gerald Jr. and Little Gerald, and Gerald the Third. The funny thing is, her students have completely embraced this whole Gerald family concept. They're sending her photos of their starters, texting updates about bubble activity and feeding times, and apparently there's now a group chat dedicated entirely to sourdough troubleshooting. Elena accidentally created what she calls the Gerald Support Network, and she couldn't be more delighted about it. Maya, the 8-year-old in Elena's class, who I think I've mentioned before, has apparently become the group's unofficial sourdough whisperer. Elena told me that Maya seems to have this intuitive understanding of fermentation, timing that some adults struggle with for months. Last week, Maya was the one who figured out that Frank's starter wasn't bubbling properly because his kitchen was too cold. She suggested he put the jar on top of his refrigerator where it would be warmer. And sure enough, Gerald the fourth or fifth, whatever Frank named his starter, came back to life within 2 days. Frank, by the way, is that retired banker I mentioned who approaches baking like an engineering project. Elena says he's been keeping detailed spreadsheets tracking his starter's activity, complete with temperature readings and pH measurements. But here's what's wonderful. Instead of getting frustrated with Frank's methodical approach, Elena has started incorporating some of his systematic thinking into her teaching. She realized that some students learn better with precise measurements and schedules, while others respond to her more intuitive, feel the dough, listen to what it's telling you philosophy. It's been fascinating to watch Elena discover her teaching style. She's always been someone who shares knowledge generously, but formal teaching is different from just helping a friend in your kitchen. She's had to learn how to adapt her explanations for different learning styles, how to encourage students who are struggling without making them feel inadequate, and how to channel the enthusiasm of students like Maya without overwhelming the quieter personalities. Jennifer, the busy mom in Elena's class, has become Elena's reality check for practical application. Elena tends to get carried away with elaborate techniques and complex recipes, but Jennifer keeps bringing her back to questions like, can I make this after the kids go to bed? And will this work if I have to stop halfway through to handle a homework crisis? Elena told me that Jennifer's questions have made her a much better teacher because they force her to think about baking in the context of real life, not just ideal conditions. And then there's Elena's kitchen renovation situation, which may finally be reaching its conclusion. I swear, if I have to hear one more, should be wrapped up by end of the week. Prediction from Dave the contractor. I might start leaving him anonymous sourdough starter care packages just to give him something reliable to focus on. But Elena texted me yesterday saying the countertops are finally being installed this week, and she's almost afraid to hope that her kitchen will actually be functional again soon. The ironic thing is that Elena's garage kitchen setup has become something of a legend in her neighborhood. She's been producing better baked goods with a hot plate and toaster oven than most people manage with full kitchens. I think it's forced her to really understand the fundamentals of baking, to pay attention to things like timing and technique, rather than relying on fancy equipment to solve problems. Several of her neighbors have asked her to teach them her garage kitchen secrets, which Elena finds hilarious. She keeps saying she can't wait to have a real oven again, but I suspect she's learned things during this renovation period that will make her an even better baker once she has all her equipment back. Sometimes constraints force us to be more creative, more attentive, more innovative than we would be with unlimited resources. The wedding cake project for her sister Maria is entering what Elena calls the serious practice phase. She's been making smaller versions of the lavender honey cake every weekend, adjusting the recipe and perfecting her techniques. Last weekend, she finally achieved what she described as the perfect crumb structure, which apparently required her to modify the mixing method and experiment with different flour types. Elena being Elena, she's been documenting this whole process with photos and detailed notes, partly for her own reference, but also because she's starting to think about maybe writing up her experiments as a blog series or even a small cookbook. She has this wonderful way of explaining the science behind baking techniques while also honoring the intuitive, almost magical aspects of working with ingredients that are alive and changing. I keep thinking about how much Elena has grown as both a baker and a teacher over the past year. When she first started the community center classes, she was nervous about whether she actually knew enough to teach other people. Now she's got waiting lists for her workshops, students asking her to add advanced classes, and what seems like a natural gift for helping people discover their own capabilities. You know, all this thinking about teaching and learning new skills reminds me of some interesting developments with my work colleagues. There's something about this time of year that seems to bring out people's creative and organizational energies. Maybe it's the longer days, or that sense of renewal that comes with late spring settling into early summer. Janet, for instance, has been absolutely glowing about her family's meal planning system. I mentioned before how her husband Tom went from skeptical resistance to complete conversion. But apparently the transformation has exceeded even Janet's expectations. Tom has become so enthusiastic about the system that he started timing his cooking processes with military precision, taking pride in hitting exactly the prep schedules Janet laid out. What I find most wonderful is how this has affected their whole family dynamic. Janet told me that their 17-year-old daughter Rachel, who's been stressed about college applications and senior year pressures, has started requesting specific meals be scheduled for the nights before big tests or important events. It's become this lovely way for the family to show support for each other, planning comfort foods around stressful times and celebration meals around achievements. And apparently Janet's organizational consulting business is growing faster than she can handle. Word has spread through their suburban neighborhood about her family meal planning success. And now, she's got parents calling her for help with everything from homework organization systems to family scheduling coordination. She's particularly in demand among families dealing with attention deficit issues, because her military background has given her insights into creating structure that supports rather than restricts different learning styles. Michelle's office mural project has finally received official approval from management, which means she can move from planning and research into actual implementation. She sent me some photos of her color psychology research, and honestly, The amount of thought she's put into this project is remarkable. She's not just painting walls, she's designing an environment that will actually improve people's mood and productivity. The fascinating thing is how the employees have started getting involved in the planning process. Michelle has been hosting these design workshops during lunch breaks where people can contribute ideas and vote on color schemes for different areas. It's become this wonderful community building exercise that goes far beyond just decorating the office. People from different departments who barely spoke to each other before are now collaborating on creative decisions and sharing stories about what kinds of environments help them feel most productive. And Robert's coffee plant, Bean, has apparently become the unofficial office mascot. I love how this small thing has taken on such significance for everyone. Robert told me that people have started bringing Bean little gifts, contributions to what they're calling Bean's Enrichment Fund. Someone brought in a small humidifier to help with the office air conditioning dryness. Another colleague contributed a special plant food that's supposed to be perfect for coffee plants. The most endearing thing is that people have started including Bean in their daily greetings. Robert says colleagues will stop by his desk in the morning and ask, "How's Bean doing today?" before they even say hello to Robert himself. It's become this shared source of joy and connection in a way that nobody could have predicted when Robert first brought in what he thought was just a small desk plant. Speaking of plants and gardening wisdom, I've been particularly aware of Mrs. Chen's garden activities lately. Her roses are at their absolute peak right now, and the fragrance drifting over the fence is so heavenly that I find myself stepping outside just to breathe it in. There's something almost magical about the timing of her garden care. She always seems to know exactly when each plant needs attention, when to water, when to deadhead, when to simply leave things alone to develop naturally. I was watching her yesterday evening from my kitchen window, moving through her garden with such quiet confidence. She had this small basket with her, collecting spent blooms from her roses, but also just observing each plant carefully. There's something about the way she approaches gardening that speaks to years of patient attention, of really understanding the rhythms and needs of living things. I keep meaning to ask her about her techniques, but somehow the moment never feels quite right. There's something respectful about the way she tends her garden, almost meditative, and I don't want to interrupt that focus with my amateur questions. Instead, I find myself learning by observation, trying to notice what she does and when she does it. Watching Mrs. Chen has made me more attentive to my own small herb garden. I've started to notice subtle changes in how my plants look at different times of day, how they respond to the weather, what they seem to need from week to week. It's a completely different kind of learning than reading about gardening or watching videos online. It's about developing that intuitive awareness that comes from patient, consistent observation. This whole theme of practical skills and patient learning made me think about Marcus and his Toyota pickup restoration project. He's moved into what he calls the bodywork phase, which means he's learning paint and body repair techniques for the first time. Marcus, being Marcus, has approached this with his usual systematic thoroughness, but it's clearly been a humbling experience for someone who's used to being the expert. He told me that paint work requires a completely different kind of patience than mechanical repairs. With engine work, you can take things apart, fix what's broken, and put them back together with predictable results. Paint work is more like art, really. You have to understand how different products interact, how temperature and humidity affect the process, how to build up layers gradually for a smooth, professional finish. What I love about Marcus's approach is how he's been documenting this learning process, and sharing it with his community workshop participants. Instead of pretending he already knows everything, he's been honest about his own learning curve, showing people that being an expert in one area doesn't mean you can't be a beginner in another. It's created this wonderful atmosphere where everyone feels comfortable asking questions and admitting when they don't understand something. Angela, his girlfriend, has been getting more involved in the restoration project lately. Marcus mentioned that she's been learning basic mechanical skills and discovering she actually enjoys the hands-on problem-solving aspect of car work. She's particularly good at the detail-oriented tasks like cleaning and organizing parts, but she's also shown an aptitude for electrical troubleshooting that has surprised both of them. The community aspect of Marcus's garage has really developed into something special. Weekend visits from neighbors and friends have become regular occurrences, and it's turned into this informal learning space where people share knowledge and help each other with projects. Someone might come by to learn about brake repair and end up teaching someone else about plumbing or woodworking. It's become this wonderful example of how skills and expertise can be shared when people create welcoming, non-judgmental spaces for learning. I find myself feeling so grateful for all these examples of growth and learning in my friends' lives. Sarah discovering she has gardening instincts, Elena developing into a confident teacher, Janet building a business around her organizational gifts, Michelle transforming workplace environments through thoughtful design, Marcus building community through shared practical skills. There's something so deeply satisfying about watching people discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Sitting here with what has now become my third cup of coffee, listening to Benny's contented breathing and watching Muffin claim her Tuesday morning perch on the windowsill, I'm struck by how perfectly this June morning encapsulates everything I love about this time of year. The windows are open, letting in that ideal temperature air that doesn't require heating or cooling, just pure, comfortable breathing space. Muffin has positioned herself where she can observe both the indoor activities and keep an eye on any outdoor developments that might require her attention. She's performing what I've come to think of as her quality control observations, making sure everything in her domain is proceeding according to acceptable standards. There's something so reassuring about having these small presences who take their household responsibilities seriously, even if those responsibilities are entirely self-appointed. I think what strikes me most about Tuesday mornings is how they represent this perfect balance between the fresh start energy of Monday and the settled routine feeling of midweek. There's still that sense of possibility, of the week stretching ahead with its opportunities and small adventures, but without the sometimes overwhelming sense of everything that needs to be accomplished. Days like this remind me why I treasure this simple life, surrounded by good friends who are all growing and learning in their own unique ways. Whether it's Sarah's herbs reaching toward the sun, Elena's students discovering they can create beautiful things with their own hands, or Marcus building community around shared practical knowledge. There's something so hopeful about watching people expand into new versions of themselves. The morning light is shifting now as the sun moves higher, and I can already tell this is going to be one of those perfect June days where everything feels possible and nothing feels urgent. Maybe I'll spend some time with my own small herb garden, trying to apply some of the observation skills I've been learning from watching Mrs. Chen. Maybe I'll text Sarah to see how her tomato plants are doing, or check in with Elena about tonight's baking class. Or maybe I'll just sit here a little longer, drinking good coffee and feeling deeply grateful for Tuesday mornings, for the friends who share their lives and discoveries with me, and for the simple pleasure of being exactly where I am, surrounded by the small daily miracles of pets and plants, and the gentle rhythm